Thank you so much for joining us in this session. I have Ciprian from Legentic, I believe I'm saying that correctly. And we're going to be talking about how they're using Dapr today in their applications. Ciprian, can you give me a quick introduction of who you are so that everyone knows who you are and what your company does?
Yeah, hi everybody. So I'm Ciprian, as you already mentioned, and you are correct. It's called the Legentic company. Yeah, we are located in Norway, and we are a company that gathers data, enriches, structures it, and provides it as help for insurance companies, law enforcement companies to find fraud online. So to give an example, like stolen cars or stolen expensive objects like watches and so on.
Interesting. So you take data in one side and give us better data out on the other side. Can we look at like what the flow of that data looks like?
Yeah, sure. Right. So as you said, we take in unstructured data, and pretty much all the time it's raw HTML. And then we have this, we call it a plugin handler, which is kind of like a manager of all the microservices that we have. And each microservice, we call it a plugin because we think of it as something that we can take away or and replace it with something else, and so on. So as you can see here, we have a bunch of plugins, and I call them 1, 2, and 3 because they have to follow a certain path, right? Because let's say plugin 2 requires a result from plugin 1 to be able to do its work. And so here, when the unstructured data comes in to the plugin handler calls plugin 1, receives back the response from the plugin 1, sends it back to the plugin 2, and so on, going through all the plugins that we're going to have in the future. And as a result, it builds up this structured document where we have, let's say, the type of the document is a vehicle, or it describes a vehicle, it has a model, it has a year, and so on. All kinds of structured data that can be used on later for our clients.
Gotcha. So take in raw HTML, give me a nice structured document out the other side that we can use to share, comb, and even query data and ask questions about in a much easier way than trying to scrape HTML, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Awesome. So let's talk about, that's the logical data flow. Let's talk about the actual architecture, because that's where we're going to start to see where Dapr starts to help with this architecture, correct?
Yeah, let's try it out. Yeah, so here's a generic overview of the architecture we have. We host everything, pretty much everything, in AWS, and you can see here the outline, the black outline is where AWS environment is, and within it we have the Dapr environment.
Gotcha.
On top here we have the plugin handler, which is kind of the public entrance of the pipeline, of our data pipeline. Here we take in all kind of crawl data to be able to push it within the pipeline, and the plugin handler pushes messages to RabbitMQ, publishes messages to be more precise.
Yep.
Yeah, and for example, here we have a parser that kind of takes in that HTML and does something with it, and then in its own time responds back to the RabbitMQ, which the responses get picked up by plugin handler, and then it goes further and does the publishing to the plugin image service. So as you can see here, there's a bit of difference because the plugin image service it connects to its own S3 bucket, for example, right? So it can have access to outside resources of the Dapr environment, let's say. But this is its own kind of thing that it does, that it knows how to do, and we don't have to worry about that. And so on, it goes through the series of plugins, as I've explained a little bit before. And all these plugins that we have, they only know to do one thing, and they know to accept a request and do a response. And then Dapr kind of helps us to facilitate all this communication between the plugin handler, all the plugins, RabbitMQ, and so on.
Awesome. So looking at this picture, I see that you're using RabbitMQ, but I would assume you're only using that in the cloud. What are you using as a developer local on your machine? Are you still using RabbitMQ, or are you using Redis or something else?
Yeah, you're right. We use RabbitMQ in our production or staging environment, but locally this would be a bit of an overkill.
Right.
So we use Redis. So it's very. It turns out to be very easy to switch the pub sub between production and dev environment.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that a lot of people benefit from when they're using Dapr is that ability to have a really nice, fast onboarding for a developer, because I don't need to have RabbitMQ. I don't need to have all this big, heavy, hard to
Right.
provision infrastructure on my development machine. I can simply run a Redis container, develop using PubSub, and then move that code without changing it to any environment that I want, and then change that backing service to RabbitMQ or to Service Bus or to whatever else that I want to, and my code stays the same.
Yeah, that's true.
So speaking of code, what language is this written in?
Most of our plugins and plugin handler included are all developed in Python.
Python. Okay. And what framework are you using? Because I know I'm not a Python developer, but I know there's things like FastAPI and there's Flask and I think there's Django. Like, which one are you using?
Well, currently, we're using FastAPI. We before we used to use Flask, but we found out that FastAPI is much better for us.
Gotcha. I noticed that Dapr shows up on this screen when you're talking about the pub sub, but I also noticed that you're talking to like S3 storage and Elastic. Are you using Dapr for that communication as well, or are you just taking a hard dependency on the SDK to talk to S3?
Yeah, every plugin that connects to an external service, it connects it in its own way. It doesn't include Dapr, so it will use an SDK or some other clients that they have.
So even if I'm a developer working on my local machine, I'm still connecting to the actual S3 storage in the cloud today.
Currently that's our setup.
Yeah, that's interesting, because one of the things that I like to explain to people is that Dapr can be used as much or as little as you like. In this scenario that you currently have on the screen, you're just using it for PubSub, and that's perfectly okay. If you already have solutions for those other areas, or they're not causing you any pain or friction, then there's no reason to take more than you need. But I like this as a great example of incremental adoption of Dapr by just using PubSub. But I would encourage you, however, because those other building blocks are awesome, because when I'm looking at this screen and I'm seeing your dependency on Amazon's S3, it seems like that could also be a Dapr abstraction there, so that when I'm a developer running locally on my machine, instead of me having to provision something in S3, or I'm on a long flight overseas and I can't develop anymore because I don't have that reliable network connection to the cloud, if I already put Dapr, another Dapr component there, I can actually abstract away that communication to storage, and then when I'm developing locally, just be writing to a file store.
Yeah, that sounds pretty good. I think we'll have to look at that a bit more.
Yeah, because then like you don't have to like log in to use special tools. You don't have to provision it. Even if you wanted to see, did the file land the way that I wanted it to, you kind of have to remote in and use cloud and use the network. But you could just look at a folder on your hard drive and say, yep, there are all the images that I expected to be downloaded, and I can see that they were downloaded correctly. So even after this is over, I'd love to sit with you and talk about other places where we might be able to incrementally adopt additional parts of Dapr as well, because that level of abstraction that we provide, it's more than just having the freedom to change in production what your backend is like. It gives the developer a level of abstraction that makes their F5 experience very fast and proficient. But again, this is a fantastic example of one, Dapr being agnostic to the cloud, because you're not using Azure, you're not using GCP, you are solely running in AWS, which is great. You're using Python with FastAPI, which shows that Dapr can be used by any language. It doesn't matter what language you use. And what I think is also interesting is that Dapr works with languages that haven't even been invented yet, right? As long as you can do an HTTP or a gRPC request, you can actually do all the cool stuff that you're doing as well. So we've seen the architecture, we've talked about some of the things you might be able to do in the future. What I'd like to do now, if you don't mind, is can we actually see the code run so we can figure out how Dapr played into your development?
Yeah, I'm gonna try to share my screen and
cool.
Short demo here for you. Okay, so as I said, we have a bunch of. I'm gonna have a bunch of plugins and a plugin handler running, and also obviously we have to kind of connect those applications that are running with Dapr. So I already have the plugin handler running, and I have one of the plugins which we call a S3 snapshot, which just takes a snapshot of the application and saves it, not application, sorry, of the document.
Okay.
And saves it in the S3. And then I have one more that I'm gonna just start right now, which does the I'm gonna start the S3, not the, and the image service is the one that downloads the images.
Gotcha.
So as soon as I run this command, because I have this plugin already running, it's gonna try to subscribe to my application.
Got it. So so this would be really clear, so that we make sure everyone follows what's going on, is that you have all your services already loaded up in your IDE of choice. They're already running in debug mode. And what you're doing in that terminal is you're basically issuing a Dapr run command saying, hey, that app that I want you to talk to is listening for your instructions on port 3700. And then when you fire that up, then you're going to be able to have a great debug experience because all your breakpoints are going to get hit, but you're actually running it inside the environment that Dapr provides with that sidecar.
Yeah, this is just one way I find it very useful for myself to do debugging of this ensemble of plugins all at once in a way.
Got it. No, that's perfect.
So if I run this, sorry, let me try again. Yes. Okay. So this is the image service that. So currently, it's trying to, the Dapr is trying to subscribe to my plugin. So and this is just a GET request, and when it's trying to subscribe, it's going to return with all the pub sub. Let's look here. The pub sub name, the funnel, the topic, which is the topic of the current plugin. So this is kind of how, as I said, this is how the application, the Dapr connects to my application.
Right. So when you issued that Dapr run command, I noticed that you had an app port. And this is when you were saying, hey, Dapr, when you want to call me and talk to me, like this is the port that I'm listening on. And one of the first things that it's done is it said, do you want to subscribe to any pub sub events? And this is you responding to that saying, yes, I do. And this is the topic I want to listen to. This is the pub sub component I'm registering with. And this is the route that I want you to call me back on whenever something shows up in that pub sub component.
Yeah.
Got it.
You're so much better at explaining.
No, I'm just making sure that everyone that I'm following along and everyone will follow along.
All right. So as soon as I continue, I can go back to my terminal and see that Dapr has been kind of connected to it, and I can look in the logs and see that it listens to this topic and so on. So I can kind of understand that my application is actually working. Right. So I actually have another application that will try to push some messages to all this pipeline, and I'm gonna try to hit a few breakpoints to see how how the plugin handler communicates with each plugin and gets response from each plugin and so on.
Perfect.
So let me try this out here.
So this is just a sample document that you use to test that your code is working.
Yes,
and we're just pushing that. Got it. And we're just pushing that onto the pipeline.
That's correct. Yeah. So this is a plugin handler, and this is our public endpoint that receives all the messages. So as soon as I'm sending a message, the public handler receives it, does whatever it has to do with it, and it's gonna try to push it forward to the first plugin. So if I'm gonna, so this is a breakpoint just before it does the request to push the messages to the pub sub. So if you can see here, this is my local host, which Dapr runs on, and I do a publish, and this is the name of the plugin, which is the topic of that plugin.
Got it. Yeah, because if we break down that URL that you're showing there, that port 4188.885 was provided for you as an environment variable. It's like when you do the Dapr run command, it sets up these environment variables so that your code is also not hard coded. Your code is able to be very dynamic because the port that Dapr is running on might change, and Dapr is able to say, hey, when you need to talk to me, like this is the port, and it's saying, hey Dapr, I need you to publish onto the funnel dev pub sub component to this topic. Right, and then you're just giving it the data that you want it to actually publish there, right?
Yes. So this is the payload here.
Perfect.
So and when I publish this, I expect to receive a message on the plugin image service plugin, just as it says here. And let's see if yes. So here is the image service plugin, and here is when it receives the request. So like we can see here in the request that it has all kinds of data that comes from. Let me just try to make this. And let's look here, maybe a little bit better.
I noticed some interesting information. Like I even see like your tracing context and.
Oh yeah, like that's that's something that it's also we set up to do a bit of tracing in using Dapr as well, using the tracing from Dapr. So maybe I can just run you through this a little bit.
Sure.
And find out. So as we kind of discovered that Dapr appends a tracing header for every request that goes through. So we can see it here. This trace parent.
Gotcha.
And so we extract this trace parent and we kind of push it forward through every plugin to be able to kind of connect them and see a whole so how the document goes. Our document goes through each plugin separately and kind of follow a trace.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I like the fact, because a lot of people might not know this, that you're taking advantage of the observability feature of Dapr that you just get by using Dapr, right? There's nothing you have to do, but what you're doing by actually taking that parent trace and propagating it along is you're helping Dapr realize that all these calls are related to one document.
Exactly.
Right. Otherwise, you would just get all these entries, which are still valuable because you know, like when they happened, how long they happened.
Yeah.
But now you're going to be able to see that when this first document entered, I can actually walk that same document through the entire path of my code by simply adding basically 1 or 2 lines of code.
Yeah.
Here to propagate that. Very cool.
Yeah. So and here's the payload that comes from our plugin handler, and this is kind of some of the item itself, which for us is a document. And from now on, we're gonna let this plugin do its job.
Okay.
And then we have this function called doer, which does its job, whatever it have to do. It's not important for us anymore. And then at some point, at this point it's done its job, and it has to go back and respond with the result it got to the plugin handler, which will collect all those results and build up our structured document. And this is just before doing the request to plugin handler. So you can see same pops up. It's just a different topic, which is the topic of the plugin handler that the plugin handler is listening to.
Perfect.
And then as I continue, we see that we're back to the plugin handler.
Yep.
And this is the other endpoint, which is not public anymore, of the plugin handler that receives all the responses.
Gotcha. So this is the plugin handler also registered or subscribed to different topics inside of RabbitMQ, which the plugins are able to use to communicate back and forth with the plugin handler.
Yes.
Got it.
And this is the second. So once the plugin handler receives the response from the first plugin, it appends it to the document and invokes not invokes, but tries to publish the document to the next plugin. So in this case, we call it the S3 snapshot plugin.
Gotcha.
And now it's the same. Again, it receives back the response from the S3 snapshot plugin, and it's gonna append it to the document.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and this is kind of a quick overview of how we run things.
And what I like about this is that you're having a really good like debug experience, right? You're
Yeah.
setting breakpoints, you're able to hit them, you're able to jump from one microservice to the other microservice and kind of see how their communication works. And I think that's one of the things that I like the best. And I've noticed that when I'm looking at your code, I'm not seeing a lot of heavy lifting or a lot of code to parse data. All this data just comes to you in the format that you're able to use immediately in all of your routes, right? All of the methods that you've written have your routes. So I think, again, is some of the great stuff about using Dapr is that with something as little as an attribute, you can subscribe and deal with the data that you're working with.
Yeah.
So one of the things I'd like to talk about, because we talked a little bit about propagating that trace parent. Do you have Zipkin running to where we can see what the Zipkin dashboard looks like?
Yes, I do, but there'll be a little bit of let me try it out and see how it works. We're still in the development phase, so some things work, sometimes they don't fully work. But because you've seen, I think some of the messages that I've been working on, they kind of timed out.
Okay.
So we might see a structure that's not fully correct, but okay. I can. I think I'm gonna have to run again through the whole pipeline just to create a better.
I guess without your breakpoints too, right? Because what it looks like what's happening is that it was retrying because it was saying, hey, this is taking too long.
Yes.
But I think what's really interesting is that being able to see that even in Zipkin, that like I timed out and I had to try again is still really valuable information, because if you don't see that, it might be an indication that your retry logic isn't working like the way it's supposed to be working, right? Things are just timing out and not having the right effect, which is interesting too.
Yeah.
So now you're just going through and you're clearing all your breakpoints so that you can try to run one more through there?
Yes. So I just run another message that's a bit quicker.
Yeah, there's one with 8, so I think it's the second one, yeah? There's the
last one. Yeah, the last one is the one I want. Yeah, awesome. So now as we run faster without having to discuss every step of the pipeline, we actually had a nicer flow. So here you can see that, we received the plugin handler, the public endpoint received the message, invokes the image service, and then we call this the controller, the plugin handler, which puts all those responses from the plugin together. So this controller is going to be called every time any of the plugins run, just to append the result together. Gotcha. And then then the S3 snapshot follows, and finally, again, the plugin handler, the controller.
So the plugin handler and the controller seem to orchestrate who gets the next message and got it. And then what's really cool here is being able to visualize exactly how where your document entered, which services it went to, in which order it went to those particular services. And you also get to see things like duration. So you'll be able to determine if one of your services is much slower or the bottleneck of your process too.
Yeah, and this kind of makes very much sense, because the image service, it actually downloads the images, so that kind of naturally will take a bit more time. It has to connect to other services and so on.
Gotcha.
This is very, very useful. I've found a few of the difficulties with my application just looking at this, kind of understanding easier how the flow goes.
Gotcha.
And this is Zipkin.
So being able to see the way that the messages are being processed has given you ideas where you might be able to optimize, right? Like, do I really need both of these two involved in the orchestration of the movement? Maybe you can actually make your code more efficient thanks to being able to see it. Because had you not been able to see this, like we're in our minds, we're trying to think, I think I know what it's doing. And those breakpoints make sense, but there might have been pieces of code that you didn't set a breakpoint in that aren't getting hit, that you're not even realizing are being part of this loop. But when you see it on the screen, you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't even think that I was calling back into this particular service. Let me go see why I'm doing that, and maybe make this a place where I can be more efficient by eliminating a hop through processing the document.
Yeah, and actually here I have an example that exactly what you're talking about. This plugin handler, the public endpoint, technically it shouldn't, we'll have to figure it out yet, but it shouldn't be called, but only the controller part.
Gotcha.
Because it should be only the entrance point of the whole pipeline. Gotcha. But I think we probably have some inconsistency there, that it's being called does some extra calls. Although they're super small, they still extra.
No, for sure. Those are hops on the network, potential areas where something could fail that it doesn't need to fail. And also, it's just going to put more taxing on that particular handler, especially, again, I think that this is so valuable. A lot of people don't think that observability is that important, but this is a great example of where just seeing it visually has already said, that doesn't look right. Like, that's not what I expected to happen. And one of two things, I need to go better understand the flow of our data or realize that that's redundant. And we can now be far more efficient, because you might end up, if you're in a big, heavy traffic scenario, having to scale out your plugin handler simply because you're calling it too often, not because you actually needed that additional scale, right? What you needed the bigger scale on is one of these other microservices, but now we're scaling out several of them because you're calling one of them potentially for reasons you don't need, which is fantastic. So again, it's really cool to be able to see how you get this for free, but with just a couple of lines of code that you added just to propagate along that parent trace header, so that Dapr is able to say, oh, okay, I see these things are related. Another thing that people might not know about the tracing, which is really cool, is you're using Zipkin now, but just like every other component we have in Dapr, you could replace this with something else. You could replace this with whatever tracing tool or observability tool you like. For example, I'm obviously a fan of Azure. So Application Insights, I could actually have this same visualization inside Application Insights inside of Zipkin, but on-prem, again, using Zipkin that runs inside of a Docker container that's automatically installed when I do a Dapr init. So when you did a Dapr init, you got Redis for free, you got Zipkin for free, and you got all this functionality in this great dev environment with no modifications whatsoever. And then you go in and you change your configurations. Speaking of configurations, could you quickly find like the actual pub sub configurations? Do you have one of those handy?
Yeah, I think so. Yes, so right here in our development deploy folder, we have the Dapr configurations for our staging environment, and
cool.
Here we have the pub sub component that we configure to be deployed on the staging environment.
Okay.
And we have quite similar thing, but similar but different for the local deploy environment, which is the same pub sub, but it's Redis in this situation. So it's much less to
correct
put together.
Yep. As long as that the type there on line looks like line 6 on the right hand side and line 8 on the left hand side, that's actually making it different. It's just saying, hey, I'm Redis now, but I want to be RabbitMQ in the future. And this is the only thing that changes. And you can change this in your CI/CD pipeline. Like, this isn't something that a developer has to worry about, because the code doesn't know if it's Redis or RabbitMQ, nor does it care, because all I had to do as a developer is write that post method, which we just saw in your code, and it will receive the proper message in the proper format, no matter what the backing service is, which again is just very cool. So just give me really quick, what are your your general impressions on Dapr and some of the things you think you might do with Dapr going forward?
I think we are interested in the furthermore in the observability part. I think we'd like to, as you mentioned, maybe because we already extracting a lot of logs and pushing them to Elasticsearch, and we'll be interested to see if we can do the same, kind of have one unified place for traces and logs. Also, we're quite interested in the binding part of the Dapr, because as you mentioned, like we'll see with the S3 if we can do something, change things around a little bit, and instead of making direct connection, do like a binding maybe, or
Yeah, so I'd be more than happy. Like, we should set up a meeting, just the two of us, because I think there's some cool places where we could go and leverage Dapr. Because I really think that S3, giving your developers a really cool like F5 experience, to where they're just looking at a local file share on their actual machine, a folder, would be a lot more convenient than having to connect to a cloud resource just to do local development. And again, the code won't have to change, which will be really interesting. So this has been an awesome tour. And again, it highlighted a lot of things that I think people need to understand about Dapr, is that you can use it on any cloud. and you're using it on AWS. You can use it with any language, and you're using it with Python, and it just gives you this great F5 experience because of those levels of abstraction. And finally, you can use as little of it as you want. In this example here, you're currently using the pub sub, and you're using observability, and you've already identified places where you might be able to go ahead and add additional functionality. So Ciprian, I just want to say thank you so much for hanging out with us and sharing with us what you're doing with Dapr.
The pleasure was all mine.
Awesome.